All right, so the person who's sharing a little bit about themselves can wrap it up. So it's like you could have just talked about this all day, I'm guessing. Brought up some stuff for people. How many people in the room are only children? Oh, small. Okay, we have our own way of getting what we wanted when we were. How many people are only children in the room? That's always that sway is kind of where we go with this conversation of how did you deal with conflict when you were a child? Who would like to share for them? What was the strategy? What was it like getting what you wanted or trying to, or addressing conflict when you were a child? Oh, Ara and I were talking about biting, so someone's got to have something better than that for us.
So it depends on, as a child for me, who I was dealing with. So if I was dealing with like my younger sibling, it would be a physical approach. If I was dealing with an adult, it would be a negotiation approach.
And it might depend upon which adult you were negotiating with. Yes, exactly. Okay. So the person kind of mattered. What about for others? Okay. That's okay. I'm getting my steps in.
We kind of found that your placement within the hierarchy of the family played a role in how you dealt with conflict. Older children were perhaps a little more confrontational. Middle children were more negotiating. And younger children were no conflicts because they got what they wanted. That was kind of our discussion.
Thank you. Anyone want to add their story? Yes, thank you.
Just in general, we talked about that sometimes conflict you avoid it at all costs, and that's a learned behavior, not anything that you chose to do. But if you were in an environment where conflict ended really badly, then you would never want to have conflict. And then how that manifests itself, with our students that either can't deal with conflict, or on the other end, maybe it's a learned behavior that they learn to go from 0 to 60 with anger right away when there's conflict, and that those learned behaviors are then some of the things that we're dealing with now.
Thanks so much for saying that. I really appreciate the learning piece you brought in there, just as we talked about kind of our concepts and feelings around safety. I think how we then approach conflict, how we work with other people definitely comes from the context with which we, have our lived experience and is certainly learned. My job is conflict resolution, and when I tell people that I'm a conflict avoidant person, they're kind of like, who's your supervisor? Why did you get that job? And for me, conflict avoidance was learned. I grew up in an alcoholic household, right? I'm an only child. So what did I do? Get out of here. Like, this is not my place. This is not my time. I've learned in my job, and to be successful and authentic to who I am, I have to engage in conflict, because if I don't, then I get lost. And then I'm not present, I'm not valued, I'm not seen and heard. And the same is very true for students in any number of ways. Like, we might just be in that place right up here, because that's how we get seen and heard and get what we need. We might not even be represented, or we might be all along kind of that spectrum based upon that experience. So I really appreciate you bringing us back to that kind of learning behavior and recognizing that everyone's experience is really different when it comes to that. So again, it's learnable. Conflict is a part of life. I think safety concerns are a part of life. And so we're going to now navigate to the skill component here of so what are some skills that you might be able to utilize and engage in doing the work both for yourself, with your colleagues at home, and then definitely with the students. So we're going to talk about 3 things today: storytelling, the power of stories, using contrasting statements, and then positions and interests. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is related to stories. So there's this great resource, and I brought a book that Ara was checking out earlier called Crucial Conversations. Has anyone been familiar with that training or heard of the book before a little bit? Okay. So this, it really comes from like a business model, like how do you negotiate and kind of get what you need? How do you have a, effective meeting with your supervisor or manage up, et cetera? But what I like about Crucial Conversations is it really talks about understanding your own story, kind of what's coming up for you, what you bring to the table, then recognizing a story in another person, and kind of negotiating along that relationship. So with Crucial Conversations, one of the things they talk about is that oftentimes you can see and hear something. So I can look around the room and be like, oh, no one's making eye contact with me. They're all on their phones. They probably think this is the worst presentation ever. Ara told them they were going to be bored out of their minds, and this is just reconfirming everything that I was worried about. So I'm telling myself that story, okay? Then I can feel any number of ways, like, well, why did I come here on a Friday afternoon? I could just be home hanging out with my kids. Like, again, why am I doing conflict resolution work? This is horrible. All of that is just created in my mind based upon observations I'm making without kind of any sort of context. There's really no facts to that that I'm kind of using to back up my story. I'm just using kind of some blanket observations in order to inform kind of what's happening for me. So what I'd like to show you is just kind of a mismatch of a story. So this is a video that comes from that Crucial Conversations training. It's about a performance review situation. I think we may have all found ourselves in one of these situations at some point. And what I want for you to just be aware of here is like, so what are the stories that you're seeing the two people tell about each other, and where might they be missing some of the context or the information about the other person?
So that was my weekend, nothing special. What about you? You seem rather chipper for a Monday.
Today is a good day. It's my performance review.
Wait a minute. You're excited about the performance review?
My next meeting is a one-on-one. I have to deliver a performance review.
That's not necessarily a bad thing.
It's with Matt.
Oh, I can see why you're so depressed.
Man, I'm stoked about this one. Because last time Melanie gave me kind of a bad review.
Last time I gave him an extremely negative review.
What exactly did she say?
You know, mumbo-jumbo manager speak.
I couldn't have been more clear.
Like needing a little touch-up here and there.
His appearance was sloppy, he was passive and unmotivated,
Maybe learn some more stuff.
and the quality of his work was completely substandard.
And we talked about my future.
I also said that I didn't see much of a future for him.
Dude, you have to read between the lines, but she was majorly hinting that I could go places.
I don't think he's gonna make it to the end of the year anyway.
With a little spit and polish, no big deal. So that's what I did. Got myself some spit and polish. Buddy, you're looking at Mr. Improved.
If anything, he's gotten worse. I don't know which is more objectionable, his social deficiencies or his technical incompetencies.
I mean, I busted my hump this last year. I even took some night classes at the community college.
I can see why you're so enthused about things.
It's more than that. I think I'll finally get that promotion I deserve. And believe me, with a new baby on the way, I could use all the cash I could get.
I'm putting Matt on probation, and that means no yearly bonus, but fortunately I hear his wife has a good job.
Especially with my wife losing her job and all.
Sorry to hear about that, mate. Tell you what, you give me a call after the review and we'll celebrate over lunch or something.
Yay.
Okay.
Cheerio.
Well, call me for lunch later. I have a feeling you're gonna need to take a break.
Well, Matt, are you ready?
You bet. Now, I'm jumping the gun a little bit here, I know. And maybe it's just nerves because my wife lost her job and all. But you'll see I deserve that promotion.
Promotion?
Yes. And I have you to thank. You know that little pep talk last time? And with being a new daddy and all. Anyway, I'm just so excited to hear what you have to say.
Facing a crucial conversation? Vital Smarts can help.
It's a very effective teaser video for this training, as you can see. So there's kind of two scenarios, two situations happening here, kind of with Matt and the supervisor around how this performance review is going to go. Do you feel like they're in alignment with one another? No. Are they misreading each other? Yes. Where are they getting their cues from? How is this misread happening? You can just yell it out. Okay, so there's some perception issues. What they want to believe, yes. So they're telling a story about, hey, hey, look, I've done all this stuff. I'm kind of meeting her where her expectations are. And then the story that's being kind of counter to that is, I said all these things and it's still not kind of up to par. But there has been a conversation maybe around what is that? What does it actually look like? Yeah.
We don't know if he actually did do any improvement over the last year, but it seems like maybe she's stuck on what,
Do you want this?
it's shorter. It seems like she might be stuck on where he was at last year.
Yeah. So we don't know what has happened for him within this last year as far as what performance improvement has actually happened, but that the supervisor might be stuck on where he was that last year. And who knows how many conversations or check-ins or moments for feedback they've had with each other kind of before this performance review comes up. And the information about, starting a family, kind of the wife losing a job is new. So that, again, speaks to just how we navigate and understand and build relationships with the folks that we work with. So a couple just key points about this. When we see and hear, tell ourselves that story, it's important to recognize what is your role in the issue or concern. And that can feel really, I think, challenging as folks in leadership to say, well, you're coming to me. I have nothing to do with this. I'm giving you the information. But you also play a part and a role, positively, negatively, maybe absently, in that dynamic or that relationship or that interaction. So being mindful of, so what am I doing here? What would a reasonable, rational, and decent person do in this scenario? We're not saying that everyone operates that way, but hypothetically, why might someone be presenting this way or be telling the story to me in this way? And then what should I do in this situation to move to what I really want? Do I really want to kind of beat Matt down and tell him that he's a horrible employee and he's not getting a bonus? Or do I really want to see him succeed in this organization, in his role, to get that next promotion? My goal as a supervisor is not to say, I'm just gonna scrutinize you day in, day out. I don't have time for that. I don't find that to be very helpful. My goal is to help you get where you need to be. And if I'm not doing that, let's talk about how this relationship could look a little bit different, instead of telling a story of you're just not gonna make it here. How do folks feel about just that scenario or those skills, or just the act of storytelling in general? Can you see yourselves doing this, perhaps? Thinking about a person in your life who maybe you're like, what the heck is going on for them? Or a story you've already told about them. Perception, reputation. Yes, okay. So that's kind of maybe a negative perception of storytelling, but it's helpful to know that we put those stories out there, we perpetuate them, and those can then cause harm. A counter to that is how we then solicit a person's story, understanding, lived experience in kind of a dialogue format, and that's where some of these restorative justice practices and values come in. So on your table, I just left some handouts. We're not gonna do a full-on, in-depth restorative practice overview, although my sense is some folks have gotten some of that recently, maybe in the future, okay. So there's just a handout about critical issues using circles. There's also some questions related to responding to challenging behavior or to help those who've been harmed by others' actions that come from the IRP that really are at the crux of kind of having a conversation related to understanding a person's experience and story. The thing about storytelling, at least when it comes to circles and restorative practices, is that it provides for folks, voice. There's the invitation to listen. So one person is sharing, other people are listening. It is a shared space that is kind of occupied by a multitude of folks. That then could mean that it's safe for some people. That could also mean that it's challenging for some people. Part of the reasons I'm not kind of behind this podium is that these are sometimes barriers to conversations, to relationships, to dialogues when we have those kind of separations between us. For some people, that might actually feel better. I might feel safer when I am not right up in your business, or when I have kind of my own space to myself. And that storytelling in the circle format at least allows for people to share what's true for them. So it again is soliciting that experience, that story, and that understanding. This is kind of a method that we use a lot at the University of Michigan, both for residential concerns, staffing concerns, and just kind of climate concerns, is let's get together and talk about it. So we do some of our staff meetings in circle formats. A key component of a circle is a talking piece, and that's again kind of in your little handout, but this is something that then you pass around the circle Whoever has it is the talker. They have the power. Their voice is what's being represented at that time. And the other folks then are invited to listen. This is just an example for you that I brought. This is a piece of a union building from the University of Washington. It's marble, and I really like this because to me this kind of represents the institution, like something that's maybe hard, unyielding, a barrier. And it also provides like structure, support, can be a great opportunity for learning, for opportunity for a student. So it kind of has this dual meaning for me. So when I am talking about structures or policies or procedures or an experience of a student, I use that as an example of a talking piece. For you today, everyone has a little circle, hopefully by your chair or your area. That's something for you to take away as a potential talking piece. And if there's time, we'll give you an activity to do with that at the end. But that's for you to kind of have as a reminder of what circles and storytelling can do in both kind of understanding but then countering information or storytelling we might be perpetuating. Questions on that? Skill set 1 completed. So much information. I apologize. Okay, so the next one we're going to talk about is called contrasting statements. And so this is really about using in the moment when we notice others are becoming defensive due to a misunderstanding or safety is at risk. So we can see kind of a reaction, a concern, someone's disgruntled, someone's getting kind of elevated. We can notice it when they're walking into the Welcome Center, like, this is gonna be interesting. Who's taking this one? Contrasting statements can help by kind of reframing and stepping out to say, what I don't wanna do is this, and I'm kind of seeing that I'm doing that, I'm sorry. What I do want to do is help get you where you need to be so that you can find the classes that you need to be successful here. What I don't want to do is kind of challenge the work that you've already done or not value that, but what I do want to make sure is that you have the most clear, up-to-date information moving forward. It's not necessarily an apology, but it's a reframe of the conversation so that that initial response or how someone's presenting to you can kind of also have a step back and you can respond in a different way. So for this, we have a scenario that we're going to pass out. It's called the frustrated employee. No one here has been frustrated, I take it. No, everyone's like, don't look. Don't look at anybody. So there's kind of an employee A and an employee B. And what I'd like for you to do, this can be individual if you feel like you've talked enough at your table, is for both employee A and B, what would a contrasting statement be in that situation? So if you were kind of that person who had that information come to you, how might you say, there should be enough for one per person. What would you say in that scenario? I don't and I do. So how would you use kind of this framework to readdress that scenario? After you get the scenario, if there are questions, raise your hand and I can pop over.